France, June 1944. The morning mist still clings to the hedgerows of Normandy. Damp earth, crushed leaves, and the low rumble of distant engines fill the air. From a small rise overlooking a narrow French lane, a German Panzer officer peers through his field glasses. Below, a column of American tanks crawls forward. Boxy silhouettes, dull olive paint, white stars faintly visible through the haze. He smirks. Shermans. For months, German briefings mocked them. Undergunned, thinly armored, easy prey for the long 75s of the Panzer Fus or the dreaded 88s. The officer lowers his glasses, certain this fight will end quickly. Then the horizon flashes. A thunderous strike from American artillery pounds the tree line behind him. Fighter bombers scream overhead, strafing roads, tearing apart supply trucks. Radios crackle. Commands turn frantic. When the smoke clears, the Shermans are still moving. Relentless, coordinated, unstoppable. The laughter fades from the German ranks. The officer realizes, too late, that what he's facing isn't just a tank. It's an entire system of war built to overwhelm. The myth of German armored invincibility is beginning to crack. In 1940, as Europe burned under the thunder of Blitzkrieg, the United States still stood on the sidelines, watching, analyzing, and preparing. The German Panzer divisions had rolled through Poland and France with stunning speed, their armored warfare tactics reshaping modern battle. To the world, the tank had become the symbol of domination. Yet in the United States, tank development was still in its infancy. The U.S. Army possessed only a handful of light and medium designs, none truly battle-proven. But America had something the others did not: industrial potential on an unprecedented scale. When war finally came, the U.S. mobilized not just its soldiers, but its entire manufacturing base. Auto plants, steel mills, and shipyards transformed into war factories. Among them, a new machine began to emerge: the M4 Sherman. It wasn't built to be the biggest, nor the most heavily armored. It was built to be reliable, adaptable, and mass-producible. By late 1942, thousands were rolling off assembly lines from Detroit to California. It was a machine forged from America's pragmatic vision of war: mobility over mass, numbers over perfection. Each Sherman shared a simple standardized design, welded or cast armor, a 75mm gun, a powerful radial engine borrowed from aircraft, and a roomy interior that allowed for easy repair. What it lacked in thickness or firepower compared to the German Tigers, it made up for in sheer numbers, coordination, and dependability. The Allies soon discovered that logistics often won wars as decisively as weapons. A Sherman could be shipped anywhere, maintained in the field, and repaired by ordinary mechanics. In the deserts of North Africa, it first met the German Panzers. The early duels were brutal. The German guns outranged the Sherman, and crews paid dearly in those opening encounters. But something remarkable happened. The Americans learned. They studied every loss, refined tactics, and integrated air power with armor in a way the Germans could not easily counter. By 1943, the Sherman had fought across North Africa, Sicily, and Italy. It wasn't perfect, but it was everywhere. A machine that could be produced faster than it could be destroyed. American tankers gave it nicknames: Ronson, for the way it sometimes burned, but also Old Reliable. For every Sherman lost, 2 more were already crossing the Atlantic. Behind that production miracle stood men and women on assembly lines working around the clock. Between 1942 and 1945, over 49,000 Shermans would be built, enough to equip not only the U.S. Army, but also the British, Canadians, Poles, and Free French. To German intelligence officers, this industrial avalanche was both impressive and terrifying. Reports described an enemy that could replace entire divisions faster than the Reich could repair a single panzer battalion. Yet even then, many German officers dismissed the Sherman as a mediocre weapon, good only in numbers, not in quality. That arrogance would soon cost them dearly, because behind the Sherman's simple design was a philosophy, one that turned the war into a contest not of single duels, but of coordination, logistics, and endurance. The machine that rolled ashore in Normandy was not just a tank. It was the spear point of an army that had learned how to fight and win on a global scale. And in France, it would prove that lesson in steel and fire. By the spring of 1944, the German army had been fighting for nearly 5 relentless years. Its armored corps, the Panzerwaffe, stood as the pride of the Third Reich, the sharp edge of Hitler's conquests. German tank crews had earned reputations as elite professionals. They had crushed the French in 1940, battled the British in North Africa, and fought titanic duels with the Red Army across the Eastern Front. Their machines, Panzer IVs, Panthers, and Tigers, were symbols of engineering excellence. To the men who commanded them, no Allied tank seemed worthy of comparison. The German High Command viewed American armor through the lens of arrogance. Reports from earlier battles, like Kasserine Pass in Tunisia, painted U.S. forces as inexperienced and poorly led. Even after the Americans recovered and improved, many German officers continued to view the Sherman as a soft machine, mass-produced, underpowered, and tactically clumsy. It was a dangerous illusion. The Reich's belief in qualitative superiority blinded it to the reality of Allied warfare, a system that was no longer centered on individual weapons, but on integration, communication, and scale. On paper, the numbers were staggering. The German army fielded roughly 1,500 tanks in the West by June 1944. The Allies would land with over 6,000, including thousands of Shermans. Yet German commanders believed terrain, experience, and the firepower of their Panthers and Tigers would even the odds. They misunderstood the nature of the coming fight. Normandy was not the open desert of Africa, nor the rolling plains of Russia. It was a dense labyrinth of hedgerows, narrow lanes, and ambush points, ground that negated long-range gunnery and rewarded mobility, teamwork, and coordination. The German doctrine emphasized individual crew skill and mechanical superiority. The American system emphasized collective performance: tanks, artillery, engineers, infantry, and above all, air power working as one. But the German officer corps didn't yet grasp that they were no longer facing the same Americans of 1942. These were battle-hardened divisions that had learned the art of combined arms warfare. Their Shermans moved with precision. Their radio networks were disciplined, and their logistics operated with mathematical efficiency. Still, the mockery persisted. German intelligence summaries before D-Day frequently described the M4 Sherman as inferior to all German types. Some officers even laughed at reports that the Americans considered it their main battle tank. They trusted their 75 and 88 guns to destroy Shermans before they could even reach effective range. Confidence ran high, and to many, it seemed unthinkable that mass-produced American tanks could ever challenge German craftsmanship. But deep within the Wehrmacht's armored divisions, cracks were forming, fuel shortages plagued every unit. Spare parts were scarce. Even the vaunted Tigers, powerful as they were, spent more time under repair than in combat. Entire companies sat immobilized for lack of gasoline. Meanwhile, Allied reconnaissance aircraft filled the skies. Every road movement risked detection. Every supply column was a target. The Germans were entering a new kind of war, one in which technology and skill alone would no longer guarantee survival. When the Allies landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944, the first clashes confirmed the old assumptions. A few Shermans were burned, A few American advances stalled, but within days it became clear that something far larger was unfolding. Shermans kept coming, through shell fire, through wrecked towns, through destroyed bridges. They were repaired overnight, replaced within hours. For every German tank destroyed, 10 Shermans rolled forward. To many German commanders, this defied reason. How could an enemy sustain such pressure, such endless replacements? The answer was industrial, strategic, and psychological. And it would soon crush their confidence entirely. As the battle for France unfolded, the laughter that once filled German tank briefings turned into disbelief, then alarm, and in the hedgerows of Normandy, they would see firsthand how American armor, and the soldiers behind it, fought a very different kind of war. Inside a Sherman tank, the world was sound, vibration, and heat. The 5-man crew, commander, gunner, loader, driver, and assistant driver, worked in a tight metal shell barely large enough to stretch their legs. When the engine roared to life, every bolt seemed to vibrate with purpose. For American tankers, the Sherman was both a weapon and a home. It was where they ate, slept, fought, and often died. Yet to them, it was reliable, a machine that started every morning, even after a night of mud, rain, and artillery fire. That reliability became a quiet kind of comfort. In Normandy, where the fighting was slow and suffocating, the Sherman's simplicity gave its crews a survival edge. German Panthers and Tigers could dominate from long range, but they also broke down constantly. The Sherman could keep moving, and movement was life. The German soldiers called the hedgerows bocage, thick earthen walls topped with dense brush. For tanks, they were nightmares. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Every turn could hide an ambush. At first, the Shermans suffered. German anti-tank guns and Panzerfaust teams stalked them at close range. Losses were severe. Crews began to weld spare tracks to their hulls for extra armor. Others draped sandbags, logs, or even concrete over the glacis plates, small acts of defiance against a brutal environment. But the Americans learned fast. They discovered ways to use the terrain itself. Infantry advanced ahead to scout and mark targets. Artillery was coordinated by radio within minutes. Engineers began fitting metal teeth to Sherman fronts, the famous Rhino tanks, to carve paths straight through hedgerows instead of climbing them. Suddenly, German defensive lines, once thought impenetrable, were being breached in hours instead of days. To the Germans, this adaptability was unnerving. The enemy they had dismissed as unskilled was now adjusting faster than they could respond. American crews also learned the value of coordination. A single Sherman was vulnerable. 10 working together with artillery and air cover were devastating. Tank infantry teams became the hallmark of U.S. operations. Infantry cleared Panzerfaust teams from the flanks, while Shermans provided covering fire and broke enemy strongpoints. Overhead, the roar of P-47 Thunderbolts, the tank busters, ensured that any German armor caught in the open would not survive for long. One American tank commander later recalled, "We didn't have the best tank, but we had the best system." That system made every Sherman more than a machine. It was a node in a vast, synchronized web of destruction. Meanwhile, on the German side, frustration began to replace confidence. The terrain they thought would slow the Allies instead trapped their own heavier tanks. Panthers struggled to turn in narrow lanes. Their engines overheated. When one tank was disabled, it often blocked the road for the rest. German tactics, designed for sweeping offensives and long-range gunnery, were now ill-suited for close-quarter combat. For every Tiger that dominated a field, there were dozens of Shermans working through villages, fields, and forests, slowly choking off German movement. And the Americans, though taking heavy casualties, kept advancing. For the men inside the Shermans, the price was personal. Each hit, Each loss was felt deeply. Many crews painted names or hometowns on their tanks. Battle in Bessie, Chicago Belle, Thunderbolt 4. These names humanized cold steel, turning each tank into a symbol of their small part in a vast, grinding machine. Every time one burned, others pressed forward, not because they believed their tank was the best, but because they believed the cause was. That morale, combined with sheer numbers and coordination, began to shift the balance. The Germans, once hunters, were becoming the hunted. Their carefully prepared defenses were now under constant assault from an enemy that refused to break. And as the front expanded, the sound of Sherman engines, that deep, steady rumble, became the soundtrack of liberation across northern France. The psychological tide was turning. What began as laughter at American armor was slowly transforming into dread every time a German patrol heard that unmistakable noise echoing through the morning fog. To understand why the M4 Sherman came to dominate the battlefields of France, one must look far beyond the tank itself. Its greatest strength wasn't measured in armor thickness or gun caliber. It was measured in sustainability. Every bolt of the Sherman was designed for mass production. Every component could be replaced or repaired with minimal tools. The U.S. Army's entire logistical system was built around the idea that a tank lost today could be replaced tomorrow. Not just theoretically, but literally, within days. Factories in Detroit, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh never slept. Railroads and convoys carried spare parts by the ton. Across the English Channel, floating docks unloaded hundreds of tanks each week. For the Germans, this tempo was unthinkable. The Reich had engineering brilliance, but it came with a fatal flaw: complexity. Each Tiger or Panther required weeks of precision assembly and rare materials. When damaged, they demanded specialized crews and scarce replacement parts. Even minor repairs could take days. By contrast, a Sherman could be fixed with a wrench, welding torch, and determination. American mechanics became as vital as the gunners themselves. Field workshops springing up behind the lines, where wrecked tanks were stripped, rebuilt, and sent back into combat within hours. The Sherman was not invincible, but it was perpetual. German officers began to notice this pattern in their reports. After every engagement, no matter how many Shermans they claimed to have destroyed, new ones appeared within days, often in greater numbers. The mathematics of war was shifting. The United States had transformed warfare into a contest of production and endurance, a system that could absorb losses and still expand its strength. And that system extended far beyond the tank. Factories, above the battlefield, Allied air supremacy sealed the fate of German armor. Fighter bombers such as the P-47 Thunderbolt and Hawker Typhoon turned every daylight movement into a deadly risk. German supply convoys, fuel trucks, and even lone tanks caught on open roads were destroyed with ruthless efficiency. By mid-1944, fuel shortages crippled German operations. Tanks were abandoned not because they were hit, but because they could no longer move. Meanwhile, the Sherman, despite its modest armor, thrived under this umbrella of control. Its crews could call in artillery or air support with reliable radios, turning every engagement into a coordinated strike. This was the true secret of the Sherman's power: integration. It was never meant to fight alone. It was designed to fit perfectly into a synchronized war machine where logistics, air support, and communication functioned as extensions of the tank itself. The result was a form of warfare that the Germans could neither match nor stop. Technologically, the Sherman also evolved. In Normandy, the standard 75mm gun began giving way to the high-velocity 76mm models, capable of piercing Panthers at closer ranges. British units fielded the Firefly variant, fitted with the powerful 17-pounder gun, a weapon capable of destroying even the Tiger at distance. Suddenly, the so-called inferior tank was firing back with equal force. German crews learned to fear the Firefly's long barrel and its devastating accuracy. In ambushes, it became the silent hunter among the ranks of standard Shermans, indistinguishable until its first shot found its mark. But even beyond raw firepower, the Sherman's greatest innovation was its adaptability. It became an entire family of machines: mine flails, amphibious DD models, bridge layers, bulldozers, and recovery vehicles, each designed to support the advancing army in ways the Germans could not replicate. While German armor operated in isolation, the Americans fielded an ecosystem of machines that moved, fought, repaired, and rebuilt in a continuous rhythm. This adaptability gave commanders flexibility the Wehrmacht could only dream of. A division could reorganize and resume an offensive within 24 hours. A destroyed bridge could be replaced overnight. A town leveled by artillery could be bypassed by improvised roads carved by Sherman dozers. And with every day that passed, the German position in France weakened. Even superior tanks cannot win a war when they cannot move. Refuel or repair. By the late summer of 1944, the evidence was clear. American armor, once derided as second-rate, had become the unstoppable engine, driving the liberation of Europe. The same German officers who had laughed at the Sherman in their briefings were now writing desperate reports about massive enemy armored concentrations that seemed to multiply endlessly. They were witnessing not just a tank, but a new kind of warfare, one born of factories, coordination, and willpower. The battlefield was no longer about the duel between two tanks. It was about the relentless rhythm of a machine that refused to stop, and that rhythm, that rolling thunder of American steel, was about to break the German line completely. By late July 1944, the Normandy front had become a stalemate of mud, rubble, and exhaustion. The Allies had gained their beachheads, but not the freedom to maneuver. The hedgerows, the bocage, trapped tanks and men alike, turning every field into a deadly fortress. For 7 weeks, the Germans had held firm. Panzer Lehr Division, 2nd SS Panzer, and remnants of the 352nd Infantry fought with relentless discipline. They believed the Americans had reached their limit, but deep within the Allied lines, preparations for a storm were underway. The plan was Operation Cobra, a breakout designed to rip open the German front south of Saint-Lô and unleash American mobility on a scale never before seen in Western Europe. The weapon of choice, the M4 Sherman, massed by the hundreds. On July 25, 1944, the morning sky turned to fire. Over 3,000 Allied bombers unleashed one of the most concentrated aerial bombardments of the war. The ground shook as entire German positions vanished under waves of explosions. When the smoke cleared, the fields were cratered, the defenders dazed, communication lines severed. And then came the sound, the deep, rolling thunder of tank engines. Columns of Shermans surged forward, advancing through dust and debris, their white stars flashing in the light of burning villages. Infantry clung to the hulls, artillery pounded ahead, and engineers cleared paths through the wreckage. The German line, once so solid, began to crack. Panzer Lehr Division, stationed directly in the bombing zone, was almost annihilated. Tanks lay overturned, half buried in craters. Survivors tried to regroup, but the coordination that had defined German tactics was gone. Radios were dead, roads were choked, and confusion spread faster than orders. The Shermans pressed on, relentless, organized, and supported from the air. Whenever a German anti-tank gun fired, within minutes a P-47 Thunderbolt was overhead, silencing it with rockets and bombs. In the chaos, American commanders, notably General J. Lawton Collins of 7th Corps, pushed forward without pause. "Exploit every gap," he ordered. "Keep moving. That became the new rule of war. What had once been a cautious advance turned into a rolling wave of mechanized momentum. Entire armored divisions, the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, tore through the disintegrating German defenses. Shermans raced through shattered villages and across open plains, their engines roaring with confidence. In the words of one observer, they didn't advance like an army, they flooded the land. For the German forces, the shock was total. Their tanks were powerful, yes, but trapped. They had been built for offense, not retreat. Heavier, slower, and often short on fuel, they couldn't escape the hammering pace of the American advance. Every attempt to regroup was crushed by artillery and airstrikes. Every counterattack was encircled by Shermans working in tight coordination with infantry and mobile guns. Panther tanks, unable to maneuver in the narrow French roads, became easy prey for American flanking teams. When the front collapsed near Coutances and Avranches, entire German corps were left exposed. By July 30th, the U.S. 2nd Armored Division had broken through to open country, and that changed everything. The slow war of hedgerows became a fast war of open fields. The Americans could finally do what their doctrine had been built for: mobility, speed, exploitation. Shermans fanned out across the countryside in massive armored columns. Dust rose behind them like smoke from a burning plane. The roads were clogged not with Allied losses, but with German wreckage, burned panzers, abandoned trucks, and broken wagons. The overconfident defenders of Normandy now faced the nightmare they never anticipated: an enemy that could replace, maneuver, and attack faster than they could retreat. One captured German officer reportedly told his interrogators, "You Americans fight like machines. One breaks, and 10 more appear." By early August, the breakout had become a rout. The German Western Front was unraveling, and the myth of armored superiority, the belief that German engineering alone could hold back the tide, was dying in the fields of France. The Sherman had done what it was designed to do: not to win a duel, but to win a war, and as the U.S. Army poured into open country, one last battle would complete the destruction. A trap that would seal the fate of Germany's best divisions in the West. By early August 1944, the breakout from Normandy had become a full-scale flood. The German front was no longer a line. It was a scattering of shattered divisions, fighting desperate rearguard actions while retreating east. For weeks, the German High Command had refused to accept reality. Field Marshal Günther von Kluge assured Hitler that the situation could still be stabilized. But reports from the field told another story: units destroyed, fuel gone, command collapsing. The Americans were not just advancing, they were encircling. At the center of this maneuver stood the M4 Sherman, the workhorse of the Allied advance. The tank that German officers had mocked was now everywhere, pushing through villages, crushing resistance, sealing escape routes. The U.S. Third Army under General George S. Patton swept east in a lightning drive, its armored divisions racing faster than German intelligence believed possible. In coordination, British and Canadian forces drove south from Caen. Between them, a vast pocket began to close around tens of thousands of German troops retreating toward the town of Falaise. It became known as the Falaise Pocket, a trap of steel, fire, and chaos. Inside were the remnants of the German 7th Army and Panzer Group Eberbach. Among them, some of the Wehrmacht's finest divisions. They fought with courage, but the odds were impossible. Every road out was under fire. Every field was strafed by Allied aircraft. The Shermans were now in their element, moving, flanking, and cutting off escape routes faster than the Germans could react. They advanced under near-total air cover. P-47s and Spitfires prowled the skies, while artillery batteries fired without pause. By August 16th, the gap was closing. German columns tried to flee east, trucks overloaded with men, half-tracks towing wounded, horses dragging artillery. But the Allied encirclement was tightening by the hour. Sherman crews described scenes of utter destruction. Smoke columns rose in every direction. Roads were jammed with burning vehicles, horses, and shattered armor. For miles, the air was thick with the stench of fuel and fire. German tank crews fought to the last. Panthers and Tigers attempted breakout charges, their powerful guns taking a toll on the advancing Shermans. Yet, for every Tiger that scored a hit, dozens of Shermans advanced from the flanks. American and Canadian tank units worked like twin jaws, closing from south and north. The Canadians, fighting through Hill 262, held their ground under relentless counterattacks. The Americans, under Patton's command, sealed the southern approaches. By August 19th, the trap was complete. The remaining German units, what was left of the once proud Panzer divisions, were compressed into a killing zone only a few miles wide. Allied artillery, tanks, and aircraft tore through the pocket for days. The noise never stopped. Those who escaped did so on foot, leaving behind their tanks, trucks, and guns. When Allied troops finally entered the area, they found the battlefield littered with wreckage beyond imagination, over 10,000 vehicles destroyed or abandoned, and tens of thousands of German soldiers dead or captured. Zielaufen, German officer, later described it as a furnace of annihilation. 48 years, destruction at Falaise marked more than the loss of men and machines. It marked the death of the Panzer force in the Bead. Westdot German armored divisions that had once been the terror of Europe were now shadows of their former selves. The survivors lacked tanks, fuel, and ammunition. Their retreat eastward was disorganized, broken, and haunted by the scale of the defeat. For the Americans, the victory confirmed what Operation Cobra had already proven. The Sherman was the perfect instrument for a new kind of warfare. It wasn't the biggest, nor the most powerful, but it was the one that endured. Its reliability, coordination with air and artillery, and ability to move faster than the enemy could recover had broken the back of German resistance in France. By the end of August, Paris was liberated. German forces were in full retreat. Toward the Rhine, the myth of the invincible, Panzer had died in the fields of Falaise, crushed beneath the weight of American organization and relentless steel. And as Allied forces rolled eastward, the white star on every Sherman became a symbol, not of luxury engineering, but of something far greater: unstoppable momentum. When the guns finally fell silent in Normandy, the landscape looked like another planet. Miles of farmland lay scorched and cratered. Entire forests were flattened by shell fire. Burned-out Panthers and Shermans stood side by side, grim monuments to the most intense armored fighting in Western Europe since 1940. For the U.S. Army, the scale of the victory was staggering. In less than 2 months, American and Allied forces had destroyed or captured more than 400,000 German soldiers and over 2,000 tanks and assault guns. It wasn't just a tactical win. It was a systemic triumph. The German army had entered France, confident in its technological superiority. There, generals believed that better tanks, thicker armor, and higher-velocity guns could hold off the Allies indefinitely. But the campaign had proven something new. Industrial strength, coordination, and adaptability mattered more than engineering perfection. In American field reports, commanders praised the Sherman not for its firepower, but for its reliability. It ran when others didn't. It started in the rain. It crossed hedgerows, rivers, and wreckage with equal ease. Its crews trusted it to move. And that, more than anything, kept operations flowing. Captured German officers were often astonished by the sheer number of Shermans they faced. One Wehrmacht captain remarked in his interrogation, For every tank we destroyed, 3 more appeared. It was not a battle of machines, it was a battle of factories. That statement became a summary of the entire Western campaign. The American way of war, with its combination of mass production, logistics, and combined arms tactics, had outpaced German doctrine completely. Meanwhile, in the German High Command, the reaction was disbelief mixed with despair. Reports from the Western Front painted a picture of near-total collapse. Communications were fragmented. Fuel convoys were gone. Divisions existed only on paper. The vaunted Panzer divisions, once the pride of the Wehrmacht, were now stripped of armor. Some had fewer than 10 operational tanks. Many resorted to using captured French vehicles or even trucks fitted with machine guns. Field Marshal Walter Model, who replaced von Kluge after his death, toured the ruins of the front and saw what remained of the 2nd Panzer Division, a handful of exhausted men and a few vehicles, hidden under camouflage netting. He is said to have turned away in silence. For the Allies, the success of the Normandy campaign was both exhilarating and sobering. They had broken through, yes, but at immense cost. Sherman crews knew their tanks were vulnerable in head-on combat with German armor. They compensated through teamwork, movement, and overwhelming fire. Support letters and diaries from American tankers reveal the dual reality of their victory. They respected the enemy's weapons, especially the 88 guns, but they trusted their own system. More one gunner from the 2nd Armored Division wrote, "We knew we could lose 1 tank, maybe 2, but the 3rd would get through, and once we got close, they were done." By late August 1944, the Allied advance was accelerating. The breakout from Normandy had opened the road to Paris, and soon beyond it, to the Rhine. German defenses in the West were no longer capable of organized resistance. At Supreme Headquarters, General Eisenhower and his staff studied the results of Operation Cobra and the Falaise encirclement. The conclusion was clear. The Sherman had performed its role perfectly, as the spearhead of mobility, not as a duelist. Eisenhower later reflected, "The Sherman was never designed to fight tigers 1-to-1. It was designed to win the war." That war-winning logic had just been proven beyond question. But even as Allied soldiers celebrated liberation across France, deep within the German High Command, a new realization was spreading. The old belief in technological dominance had failed, and in its place stood something they had never truly understood: the power of a nation that could outproduce, outmaneuver, and outlast them on every front. The shattered armor of Normandy marked the beginning of a new phase. The retreat to the Rhine, and the desperate attempts to rebuild what could no longer be rebuilt. The weeks following the Falaise, disaster marked a turning point not only in the war, but in the very perception of warfare itself. For the first time since 1939, the German army was in full retreat on all fronts. The blitzkrieg machine that had once conquered Europe in months was now running on fumes, its tanks destroyed, its fuel exhausted, its spirit broken. In the ruins of northern France, Allied intelligence units surveyed the wreckage left behind. They counted hundreds of destroyed Panthers and Tigers, their thick armor burned black, their turrets blown apart by artillery or airstrikes. Nearby lay abandoned half-tracks, staff cars, and thousands of rifles and helmets scattered across the fields. The evidence was undeniable. German quality had met American quantity, and quality had lost. It wasn't that the Sherman was the better tank in isolation. Technically, the Panther's gun, armor, and optics surpassed it in nearly every measure. But war is not a contest of machines. It is a contest of systems. The U.S. Army had mastered that system. Each Sherman was not an isolated weapon, but part of a vast network, supported by engineers who repaired bridges overnight, truck convoys that delivered fuel without pause, and air squadrons that watched the roads ahead. When one Sherman was lost, another rolled off the ships within days. Germany, by contrast, could not replace what it lost. Its factories were under constant bombardment. Its railway lines were shattered. Every tank destroyed in Normandy was a blow that could not be undone. German officers began to grasp this grim truth. Reports from the surviving panzer commanders grew increasingly bleak. One colonel from the 12th SS Panzer Division wrote in late August, "Our machines are superior, but our world has collapsed. Their tanks never stop coming." That realization struck deep into the morale of the Wehrmacht. The aura of the Panzer, once the symbol of German invincibility, was gone. Meanwhile, within the Allied ranks, the lessons of Normandy reshaped the future of armored warfare. American designers and commanders took note of the Sherman's limitations and began accelerating work on heavier models, such as the M26 Pershing. But they also recognized that what had truly won the campaign was coordination, combined arms warfare, tanks, infantry, artillery, and air power acting as one had reached its maturity. Normandy had been the proving ground. General Omar Bradley summarized it best in his post-war memoirs. "We learned that a tank does not win battles alone. It wins when everything moves with it." The Sherman became a symbol of that philosophy. Mobility over perfection, reliability over prestige. Even its critics, decades later, would come to acknowledge that the M4 achieved what it was built to do: sustain the offensive without pause. From D-Day to the liberation of Paris, from the breakout at Avranches to the pursuit across the Seine, the Sherman was always there, not flawless, but unstoppable. In occupied France, liberated towns began to name streets after American tank crews. Children climbed on the hatches of abandoned Shermans, painting flowers over the scars of battle. For them, these steel beasts were not just machines of war. They were symbols of deliverance. For Germany, however, the psychological wound was deep. Hitler's faith in wonder weapons, the idea that superior technology could reverse the tide, only grew more desperate after Normandy. But to the men in the field, it was clear: no weapon, no matter how advanced, could save a nation that was being crushed by the full industrial might of the United States. As autumn approached, the war moved toward Germany's borders. The Allies were confident, the momentum unstoppable. The Sherman, once mocked, had proven its worth, not by elegance, but by endurance. And in that endurance lay the story of modern warfare. Victory belonging not to the most feared, but to the most prepared. The hedgerows of Normandy are quiet now. Where once tanks roared and shells tore through the dawn mist, only the wind moves through the grass. In those still fields, the wrecks of Shermans and Panthers lie rusted and silent. Relics of a time when the fate of the world was decided by men inside steel hulls barely 3 inches thick. The German officers who once laughed at the Sherman could never have imagined how this modest machine would define the outcome of the war, not through superiority, but through persistence, not by brilliance of design, but by unity of effort. The Sherman was the embodiment of a new kind of warfare, one powered by organization, logistics, and the relentless spirit of those who drove it forward. Its crews came from farms, cities, and small towns. They were not knights of armor, but citizens in motion, carrying with them the full weight of a nation's industry and belief. In the end, that was the lesson of Normandy. That courage and cooperation could outlast fear and arrogance. The Panzer may have been sharper, but the Sherman endured longer, and history, as it often does, favored endurance. When Allied forces liberated Paris in August 1944, the world saw more than a military victory. It saw the triumph of democracy's capacity to adapt, to learn, to organize, and to fight together for something greater than conquest. Decades later, historians still debate armor thickness and gun calibers, but the truth remains simple. Wars are not won by the strongest weapon, but by the strongest system. And in 1944, that system wore an olive-drab coat and a white star. The Sherman rolled through France not as a marvel of engineering, but as a symbol of determination. It was, in every sense, the tank that carried a generation across a continent and toward victory.